Well, first of all, I want to say how impressive it is that there's this many people in this room on an early morning time in a venue that none of us have ever been in before, on a rainy morning, and to talk about 3 films that none of you have ever seen. So, so yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful turnout. It's one of the things I love about this film festival is that people really show up, and that's an important part of what we're here for. So, okay, why are we here? You may or may not realize that we're living in an age when I would call it, without exaggeration, a kind of golden age of documentary filmmaking. And certainly, given a lot of things going on all over the world, the fact that this golden age exists is an incredibly positive thing. The films that are represented on the panel today are all films in which there are central characters within these stories that are emblematic of important issues that are going on all over the world. And when we were talking about it earlier, one of the themes that emerged is that one of the things that all 3 films have in common is a notion of resistance, which is something that I think all of us, or some of us, might have an interest in as we speak. To kick things off, I would like to ask each of the people on the panel to tell us a little bit about themselves and also about their films, so we have something to start with in terms of the general topic. So, want to start out, Pam?
Sure. Thanks, Ira. And thanks to the Traverse City Film Festival. This is our 2nd time here, and we love the way that the community is so involved in creating this festival. I think it makes it a unique festival. Anyway, I'm from the Appalachian Mountains in Pennsylvania, a coal mining region. It was very poor economically, but very rich culturally. And its richness came from oral storytelling. The currency in trade in my town was how good a storyteller you were. And my father was a great storyteller. And I like to think that I carry on that tradition, but in the filmic arts. Anyway, I'm here with 500 Years, Life in Resistance. 500 Years caps a trilogy of films that I started to make in Guatemala in 1982. I first went there to investigate the role that the United States played in destroying the democracy in Guatemala and in ushering in a legacy of brutal military dictatorships. In 1982, it was my first film. I shot all the film. It was in the middle of a war, a civil war, and I wasn't sure how I was actually going to tell the story. And then I met a remarkable young woman. She was 22 years old. She was Mayan. She was living in exile from Guatemala. And her name was Rigoberta Menchú. And Rigoberta Menchú was an innate leader, even at 22 years old. And as I brought her into the editing room to show her the scenes that we had filmed in Guatemala, she started to tell me her own story. And the story was such a personal parallel to all of the scenes that I had filmed that I decided that she and I together would write would look at the scenes. She would write her story, and we would go into a studio, and she would speak her story directly to camera, which in 1982 was very unusual. I think only Reds did that, and that was a dramatic film. And Errol Morris hadn't been on the scene yet, and the Interrotron hadn't been invented. She told her story, and we made the film When the Mountains Tremble. And When the Mountains Tremble was shown all over the world. And it really put Rigoberta on the world stage. And 10 years later, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, the first indigenous person to ever be awarded that. So being with that film and being with Rigoberta really helped me not only understand Guatemala, because Guatemala wrapped its arms around my soul and never let me go, but it also helped me understand the Mayan perspective of justice and how the quest for justice is justice. And it really set me on my path to making films about the quest for justice and human rights. So fast forward 35 years. 500 Years is really about the first genocide trial against a perpetrator, an accused perpetrator, for committing the crime against indigenous people anywhere in the Americas. Paco and I went to film the trial. The trial was incredibly dramatic. And we just went to film the trial to make a document of it. But the forces that were let loose as a result of the trial, I thought would make an incredibly interesting film. So we followed those people that we met in the trial and the forces out into the world. And the lead protagonist in the film is now a Mayan anthropologist journalist, really a public intellectual, named Irma Alicia Velázquez Nimatu. And she tells the story of the significance of the trial and what happened in Guatemala next. I thought that all of us, in this moment of confronting authoritarian regimes around the world, including in this country, could learn a lot from the resistance of the Mayans, that they had some very special and interesting lessons. And that's really the story of 500 years, which has an incredibly triumphant third act that can give us some inspiration here.
All right, cool. So Paco, you want to add to that?
Okay. Well, I don't have much to add to what Pam said about the film. As for myself, I grew up in Latin America in an era of brutal military dictatorships. And so that really affected my life. And I lived through the dictatorships, but also lived through the resistance that emerged against those dictatorships and the rise of the human rights movement in Latin America, which eventually put most of these generals in prison or got them out of power. And watching that process in my lifetime was a huge lesson and inspiration. And in a sense, in dark times like I feel we're living in now, it keeps a light on for me of optimism that I do feel that there is a way out, and we just have to persevere. And as the theme of 500 years says, life in resistance, the Mayans have been doing it for 500 years to preserve their way of life and their culture and their way of seeing the world. So that's what has inspired me to do these films with Pamela, because I really believe that we need to tell these stories that show not exactly a victory, but sometimes there are victories and there are setbacks, but I think that we have to think about forward progress, and not in a naive way, but in stories that are real and that really have happened. It's important to highlight them, I think. So that's what we're doing with 500 Years.
Which is playing at 12 o'clock, right after this panel at the Milliken.
Yeah. And tomorrow at 3.
Yeah, there's just enough time to run over there. Okay, Zaradasht?
My name is Zaradasht Ahmed. I'm originally Kurd from northern Iraq. I granted asylum in Norway back in '95. So I've been living in Norway since then, 23 years, I think. I have a film with me called Nowhere to Hide about Iraq, and pretty much about Iraq today. I follow a family throughout 5 years. One of these 5 years of dramatical change in Iraq, right before the American pulled out back in 2011. And the idea started together with a Norwegian war surgeon. We wanted to document the cases in Iraq while the American was there, the troops. And from 2010 to 2011, when Obama did his promise, he pulled out the troops from Iraq. We had to also follow that change, because I thought he will never. I thought it was just a propaganda, but actually they did. And that put the whole idea for the film in change. So we stayed to continue after that. And being a witness in that period, what was happening in Iraq, I could not turn my back on. So I hope you get a chance to see the film. It's important for you to see as an American. And I've been going with the film since 2 months ago here. We had the theatrical release with the film, and just to shade light of something is never finished. Where first of all, the occupation was wrong. In a way, it's a foreign troops going into a foreign country, and then later on we learned based on false accusations, which many people now don't remember why, but it was because Iraq being accused for being part of 9/11, which never been proved, never, and they admit. And also, that was not enough. It was also accused of being having the chemical weapon and mass destruction weapon, which has been used throughout the whole campaign of manipulating people here in the States and the rest of the world for this case, to go war for that, which was also based on false accusation. They go in and then don't know anything about the culture, the background, the historical background. They step on many things, turn the country against what you see today. As a result of that, ISIS came. As a result of that, Iraq being pulled back to 50s. Iraq in 80s was one of those countries, most progressive, developed country in the world. We had almost no literacy. Everybody was on job, everybody had good salary, and the country was developing very well. And being today in Iraq, I can't say almost a failed state, sectarism en marche, literacy is back in 50s, poverty is one of those countries that top 10 poor country, like there are maybe 8-9 millions live under the $2 a day. And nevertheless, as you see how devastated, every day we hear about Iraq. So I follow a family in 5 years. We are witnessing the life after pulling out up to today. So that's generally, and it's a powerful film, but it's very important. I hope for you to see it.
When is it showing?
It's showing twice. I think one of the salles, the 27th, it's a small one. It's sold out. And then the other one, it's 29th. I think, yeah, that's possible for you to see the film.
All right, and finally, Pau.
Yeah, okay. Hello, my name is Pau Faus from Barcelona, Spain. And I'm here, the film that I have in the festival is called Ada for Mayor, that is going to be screened today. It's only screened once today here at 3 p.m. And yeah, I will just tell you how I ended up doing this film, because it was something that happened during a whole process of change that we lived in Spain. In 2010, well, not 2011, maybe some of you don't know, there was a very strong protest in Spain. It was called the Indignados movement. And it was a consequence of the economical crisis. There were very strong problems in Spain. One of the most dramatic problems was evictions. There was many people losing their houses. And there was a very huge protest in many different cities, Barcelona, Madrid. The main squares of the cities were occupied for 2 or 3 months. And this was something that touched to many people. Before that moment, activism was something like linked to a very specific kind of people, I would say. And after the Indignados movement, after that spring of 2011, there was a sense of connecting many causes, many fights. Many people found out that they were not alone against this injustice that was happening. Mainly related to the economical crisis, but also to a right-wing government that was not governing the country as many people thought it should be. So at that moment, many movements organized, and one of the strongest movement was the anti-eviction movement. It was a very strong movement during the following years, 2012, 2013, 2014. And in that movement, there was a very strong figure, an activist that ended up becoming probably the most famous activist in Spain. And her name is Ada Colau. She was the spokeswoman of this anti-eviction movement, and she was the face of these many people that were not trusting anymore politicians, and that decided to organize themselves and to try to change things by themselves. So, for example, the anti-eviction movement stopped evictions in the whole country. They would just step in front of the doors and they would just stop the police. And this was something that at the beginning was maybe a group of little 5, 10 people. At the end, it was something very common in the whole country, like 500 people. There was like a huge net of solidarity about this. So this anti-eviction movement and the image of the family being evicted from their house was like the image of the crisis in Spain. And this activist, Ada Colau, in a way represented this, as I said, this way of organizing and facing, and protesting against the politicians. Not only protesting, but organizing and doing something about it. In 2014, a group of citizens decided to make a political movement because they decided that it was a moment to jump into the institutions. It's like there was a huge protest in the streets, but the same parties were winning again and again. So it was like, okay, maybe we have to we have to jump, and we have to play the institutional game. So there was this political party called Let's Win, because the idea was from the beginning to win, and that decided to run to try to win the Barcelona City Hall. And she was chosen by many people to be like the face, like the leader of this movement. And since I knew her, this Ada Colau, this spokeswoman from the anti-eviction movement, from the anti-eviction fight, I asked her that during this whole year that the campaign lasted, from the moment they decided to run for mayor until the election day, I asked her that I wanted to show this journey that she was going to start, and I wanted to film it, and I wanted her to explain me while it was happening, how was she feeling, because of course she was jumping from activist to political figure. So in a way she was like becoming her nemesis. She was in a way becoming what she was fighting against, and not only her but many people that was around her, because the movement was very strong. So I thought it was very interesting to see how she had to deal with this contradiction, and at the same time to see how this group was organizing, this like citizen movement was organizing against these very big and political parties that have been there all the time. So the film is about this. It's about how a group of people organizes and creates a candidature to try to win, and how she lives this journey full of contradictions and full of discoveries and full of course, very intense moments, sad moments, happy moments. And that's the story about. I will not tell you how it ends. Many people know, but I try not to say it.
Google it.
Yeah, you can Google it, or you can just read the briefing in the festival book, and you will see it.
But better to see the film.
Yes, but the thing is that at the end, the whole thing is not about a woman who runs for mayor or about this group of people who organizes in Barcelona. What I have discovered showing this film abroad, because it's been traveling around, is that it's a story that it connects very strongly with what is happening in many places. I think in many places we have this feeling that there is nothing to do about what is happening in politics. You can feel this in this country. You can see it in many countries in Europe. And this story tells us something that I learned when I was part of this anti-eviction movement, and that is, if you are well organized and if you have a clear objective, it's not that difficult to win, or at least to try it. And I think it's something that we really need nowadays, and that's, I think, the most important thing the film talks about.
All right, great. So, as I listen to all of you talk about the movies that you're here with, one thing that struck me is that you described in various ways fairly horrifying situations that, but yet the movies are about inspirational figures within those stories, people who actually are trying to transform what's going on around them. And it seems to me that there's two sides to that. If you're that person that the film is going to be centering on the one hand, if you're trying to create a movement, if you're trying to change the world, having cameras trained on you could be an incredibly positive thing for what you're trying to accomplish. On the other hand, you're subjecting yourself to scrutiny that would not be true if the cameras were not trained on you, which requires an enormous amount of trust on their part that they're going to be treated in the way that they would like to see themselves be treated. So I'm curious if any of you or all of you could talk a little bit about that relationship and how you establish that trust, and yet on the one hand you want to establish the trust, on the other hand you want to retain your editorial independence to be able to make the movie that you feel you want to make. So, want to dive in?
Sure. I think that I think it's really important as a filmmaker to go back and stay connected to people and places where you've made films. Not necessarily to make other films, but because you become a very important part of someone else's life and they've become a very important part of your life, you need to continue that relationship. And in the case of Guatemala, having that relationship over a long period of time has been often like giving me an all-access pass to a rock concert. I can go anywhere within a certain framework, obviously not in the right-wing circles. But it's important, I think, to build a relationship that is based on everything you do before you start the cameras rolling, what you do while the cameras are rolling, and to ensure that people have a say in how the film is going to be used. And I like to think that we've gotten better and better at doing that over the years. We were really working with people and movements on our very first film. And now that's become a very welcome trend in social issue documentary filmmaking, that you have to ask yourself, what do I want the film to do? And how can the film go out and live in the world? And how will the lead protagonists and the secondary protagonists travel with the film? And what are they going to get out of it? And what can they do? But this thing of maintaining your editorial independence, I think also helps you have a rigorous intellectual approach, because you're often going to be discussing with the protagonists the presentation of their story. And they may or may not agree with you about certain aspects of it. And they may or may not have a sophisticated level of audiovisual communication. So it really forces you, in a good way as a filmmaker, to explain what it is, to debate it. And oftentimes you come out with a much better solution than you would have come out just as an auteur filmmaker. That they're really helping you craft and create the story. And they're helping you design your outreach and impact campaign.
You're all being too polite.
Okay, and then
just to add to what Pam said, I think a concrete example, which I found, fascinating. Ian Malicia, who is one of the protagonists of 500 Years, had come to New York into our edit room to see a rough cut of the film, and she's seeing it obviously through different eyes than us, and from her Mayan perspective. And there was one scene. Malicia grew up with education and a middle-class Mayan Quiche family. So there's a scene where she has some jewelry on, and she felt that this would send a message to the Mayans that haven't had that opportunity, that she wanted to explain the fact that she had the opportunity was what changed her life. And she thought it was really important that be included in the narrative. And so, yeah, as Pam says, you listen, you have this conversation, and things make sense. So even though we have editorial control ultimately, but we make films with people, not about people. So that with factor is crucial. And you have to honor that and respect that. And so these conversations that happen in the process of making a film are really crucial.
Zardash, does that parallel your experience? Or?
Yeah, my experience is a little bit different because the film is not that traditional. And good films is always revolving around good characters, and characters the heart of the film. And I'm generally like in that genre, and go for seeing development throughout the period of time, which I don't like to set up. I allow it open. I call it the slow cooking movie. It's like you give it the time to go under the skin of things, understand. Because if yourself not able to understand the changes in the film, in your story, you will not be able to transfer that to the audience. So for that, I like to stay with the characters. But in this particular story about Nouri Sharif and his family, he's a medic, a very good-hearted medic, which I needed a person to represent something good in this destroyed country, somebody who I relate to, somebody who also abroad relate to. And that came not from the first day. It came throughout following. As I was mentioning in the beginning, me and Dr. Hans went there to document the war in Iraq. It's a big question. And we went to in central Iraq where everything was happening there. And was, well, maybe you heard, if you remember, the media about Triangle of Death. Places that no-go zone, like even don't think about it. So, in order to document those places, I could not go there, like just go there with a big camera and trying to document. Here I am. First of all, you put your life in danger, and also those who cooperate with you, you will put their life in danger because they will stay there. So that relation, it took time for me to build. And in Iraq, it's wherever you stand, today's Iraq, wherever you stand, you are against the majority, the most of people, it doesn't matter who you are supporting. It's not like here, like, if you... if you are left, so you have the whole country against. If you are Shia, one of the brand of Muslims, and if you are Sunni, the other brand, like ISIS brand. So you always against the other part. And then you have the tribal thing, and you have the Kurd and the ethnical background, Kurd, Arab, Turkmen, and you have the religion background, Shia, Sunni, which is Muslims, and then you have Christian, and you have Yazidis, which you hear about a lot these days. And all these things, it's a combination, and I am, as a Kurd, living abroad in Norway, trying to make a film about what's going on in this triangle of death. It was a very, almost mission impossible, but this, it was possible. In matter of fact, the film became the film that I have with me, and that's because you need to gain that trust. And it's not about the small camera or big camera or crew. It's about your intention and how much you believe in that, and how much your protagonist case reflect on you. And then when you gain that, so the editorial question will be much easier, because then you have gained the trust. Exactly, if you go and to a barber and tell your hair. So once you trust the barber, you don't question why, if you use a new method on you. So you trust the barber. Especially for ladies, maybe that's more understandable, but. And it was for me like that. That relation took about 3 years. And the time where in the beginning, my protagonist was not in the film as a protagonist. He was working with us. I taught him, you know. At the beginning, I gave them camera. It was like 12 person. Gave them 12 camera with mobile phones and small Canon, Panasonic, to document in the areas, in the hospitals, what was going on, what was happening to them. And then I also was involved with that, but throughout time when things were changing, I also had to adapt to that, changing the character. And this man, his nurse, medic Nouri Sharif, his name, and his family became a center of that story, where ISIS was around, and then Iraq was falling apart, and it was more interesting for me to follow what's that impact on them, this war, because they never asked for it. And it was interesting to follow that, changing all the, what you call it, the premises for the older movie that we were about to make, and then changing it to that. And the day where I felt like, okay, he trusts me as a Kurd, and he's a Sunni Muslim, like it's to the opposite things today in Iraq. And once he started to believe that my intention was good intention, I'm on his side. That why, you know, you can make film about, it's the good character where you're ambivalence, you know, when your character's like, you like him, you don't like him, you can make a good film out of that character. But in my case, I needed to like him. I needed to trust him. I needed to believe in what he believed. And I found out that this guy, he was working in the middle of this hell. Literally, when things changed, became like hell. And he had the very essential values as a human being, which inspired me to go continue, you know, and then my life was not that important as his life, because he was the good-hearted man, you know, he was the one exactly world needed him to see. So that's for me was essential, but otherwise, I would like to work with a character where I am not sure whether I like him or don't like him, because that's progress, you know, that's make the story more
I
interesting.
want to submit also, though, that I think it's important, not that the stories are character-driven, but that you're weaving the political narrative throughout the personal narrative and across the dramatic arc of the film, so that at the end of the film, you not only have gotten to know the protagonist better, but you have gotten to know the protagonist in the political context in which they live. And that is part of what creates trust. You know, that you are also following the meta story and what that means to them in their personal lives.
Yeah, that's a good transition into Pao's answering.
3 years, you know. If I add 1 year for the research, that's 4 years. But actual working with them, 3 years. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a movie that's showing here that was an Academy nominee this past year called Fire at Sea, which is about the immigrant crisis as it's experienced on this tiny little island that's part of Italy called Lampedusa. And what's interesting about that movie in relation to this is that the filmmaker spent a year on the island before he shot one frame of film, just getting to know the islanders, and then started shooting the movie after spending a year there. So it's, you know, it does take a while to establish that kind of trust. So Pao, go ahead and.
Yeah, in my case, it's quite different from this, and I usually need to start filming because it's a way of them getting used to me getting used to them, you know, and also to understand where are the limits, where are the distances, where are the situations I can film, I cannot film. even sometimes when you have a camera, you are allowed to enter some places because, you know, he's filming, you know, so maybe you are like, okay, only 2 or 3 can be here, but I can be here because I'm filming. If I would not have a camera, they would say, what are you doing here, you know? So this is something that, in my case, I usually tend to film too much. And in this case, for this film, the trust was already there. I knew the main and also the main protagonist was already there. I already decided the film was going to be explained through her. But for me, the problem was how do you deal with this trust when you have to edit the film? Because in my case, I was filming mainly on my own. So I'm filming on my own. I'm filming something I believe in. I have no problem saying I'm part of this movement. I have no need to, you know, sometimes some documentary filmmakers, you know, where are you? Are you inside? Yes, of course, I'm part of this. I have no problem. If I would not be part of this, I would not have the access. So, but when you have to edit those 200 hours of material, in my case, you really have the problem that you are extremely attached to the material because you have filmed it, and sometimes you even just like the way you film it. You were there and you remember the day, and maybe it was a very important day, so you might not judge that day from what you filmed, but from what you remember. This is always a big mistake. And another thing, I was emotionally involved with what I was filming because I am part of that movement. So you realize that this, it's like I don't know if you say in English, it is the double edge of the knife. The same trust or the same situation that gives you the access can be your main problem when you have to edit that because you are too much attached to the material. So in my case, it was very important to edit the film surrounded by people who were not part of that political movement. I didn't even ask them who they voted. I really didn't care. But they were really, you know, they really liked the story about the activist who wants to become the mayor, you know, the whole thing. About this conflict of the protagonist, this David versus Goliath story that's behind the film. So for me, what I learned is that the trust is not only something positive. It can be something that it can go against you. And for me, it reminds me of the image, you know, when somebody goes, well, maybe now it's different with social media, but some years ago when somebody went on a trip and they tell you, do you want to come home and watch the pictures? And you go like, okay, they're going to show me 200 pictures, you know, because they're not able to choose because they are so attached to the material. And that's what I felt when I was editing. So really to have somebody to detach me, it was very important to fight against this trust, you know?
So let's leap forward a little bit now. You know, you have these films that you've created that are clearly attached to this idea of trying to show the world the situations that are depicted in the films through the stories of these individuals. Let's talk about outreach and about the ways in which you actually can help to create audience around these movies. You know, clearly it's in your interest as filmmakers to have your films seen by as many people as possible, but you have a different and deeper responsibility when you're dealing with these kinds of issues-oriented movies to the people in the film to actually get their message out and get their story out to the world. So I'm curious if you have anything to share with us in terms of what kind of action points there are around the movie so that people can get involved with the issues themselves and obviously using the film as a tool to get those messages out there.
Yeah, well, I would say outreach is, for us, it's a very multifaceted process, and it really, you're reaching out to different audiences. Sometimes it's the audience of the people that are actually in the film, the Mayans in the case of 500 Years. But then when you take a film out into the world, when you first start showing it in public, the film starts to teach you about how people are seeing the film. So when we premiered 500 Years at the Sundance Film Festival, to all American audiences, it really was a revelation how they connected to the resistance theme. And people would say in the Q&A, wow, you know, this is like our story. And so, and even though the film is in Guatemala, never leaves Guatemala. But so we are on the U.S. level, we're launching a tour called the Resistance Saga, which will start in the beginning of 2018, which is the 3 films of the trilogy. 500 Years is the third. And it's a 35-year span of resistance. And Mayans really have a lot to tell us about long-term resistance, about hanging in there, about going with the victories and the setbacks. It's a very powerful combination of the 3 films, and with a forum with the Mayan activists there, and a concert at the end of the day with a Mayan singer-songwriter. She's a fast-rising, I'd say a star in the Mayan world, and she sings songs of resistance. So that's one way to get, we've embed 500 years in this larger event, which will go around the U.S. to, probably 20 cities.
Traverse City.
In Traverse City, yes. We're working on it now. We're just lining that up for next year. In Guatemala, on the other hand, the release of the film is being led by the protagonists of the film, and we're just helping coordinate. They've developed a whole workshop around the historical memory of Guatemala, which is largely absent. It's not taught in the schools. And so the 3 films are going to be part of a workshop, and then carried around the country and into universities. After we do a release that's going to begin in the highlands and then move to the city, which is the opposite of what usually happens. Things usually start in the city and then go out to the countryside, if they do at all. So those are, in this case, 2 different approaches. And in other places like Colombia, which is going through a peace process, the themes of 500 years have really struck a chord, and there are plans to show 500 years in all the places where the FARC guerrillas are demobilizing, and to give this message once again of peaceful resistance and long-term nonviolent resistance, which is what's going to happen now in Colombia if the peace process works. The guerrillas who have been fighting in an armed struggle for 50 years are now going to shift into nonviolent resistance. So we'll see how that happens. But so the film has taken on a role there as well.
The Resistance Saga in the United States is also going to be partnering with local groups in resistance. So the idea of a forum, the films, the concert, and a forum over 2 days is meant to really strengthen local groups in resistance. It's also meant to strengthen, because in the third part of 500 Years, you see some of the largest demonstrations in the history of Guatemala. So the Resistance Saga in the United States is meant to solidify these newly minted activists, women and men who came out for the Women's March in massive numbers, indigenous representatives and their allies who flocked to Standing Rock last summer to support the water protectors and the earth defenders there. And so it's really meant to be a very inclusive event. And actually on our skylight.is website, if you're from a city that would like to partner with the Resistance Saga, please sign up, because we're organizing it all right now and raising the money for it all right now.
And your hope is that the money will come from these local organizations that'll be sponsoring the individual events?
Yeah. We hope both. We'll bring a certain thing to it, not only the films, but we'll bring a certain amount of funding to it. But we need a venue to host it, and we need certain things to be done locally to be part of the partnership. I should also say that in Guatemala, as Paco mentioned, as we launch it, the genocide that occurred in the 1980s is not taught at the high school level, and it's not taught at the university level. So the 3 films are really, including 500 Years with the trial and everything, is really meant to open up the historical memory, especially for the people who are 30 and under.
And are any of the people in the movie going to be traveling around in the U.S.?
Yeah, they're going to be there.
The 2 main protagonists of the film, one is an Irma Alicia, an indigenous woman in her 50s, and one is a 29-year-old law student, another Mayan leader.
And Zaradash, I would imagine that, if you were to try something similar, getting your protagonists to be able to travel in the U.S. would be pretty much impossible at this point, right?
Unfortunately, well, I leave this question to you all. I had a very nice chat yesterday. I was little bit aggressive about that issue because it touches me very deep. Banding, just the idea of banding, who we are to band. That's for me. It's not my right. And also, I haven't tried to bring nudie to the States. I had myself problem to get in, even though I am Norwegian, you know. I had a terrible 3 hours in JFK. Never had in my life that kind of interrogation. I've been in worse countries. I've been in Afghanistan working 2 years. And I've been in Iraq many times during various, you know, Saddam Hussein, and then now. I never had that experience in my life, being interrogated 3 hours in row with a person. You know, why I'm talking about this, just to give you an idea how things are outside. Mm-hmm. And having, like, you were in the opening for the Human Rights Watch. There were 2 events. It was like I was invited for the opening. The film was opening Human Rights Watch Film Festival in Lincoln Center, which should be enough, you know, that trusting you, you are a good guy. And I was, me and my protagonist were also invited to get the award for courage filmmaking, you know, one of the biggest awards in Human Rights Watch generally. And I had the letter of invitation for that. And it's enough, I am Norwegian, you know, like my papers is open everywhere, you know, they can get whatever they want about me. It's like they are cooperating intelligently. And I had that interview in Norway. I already had that. I already been in the embassy for a couple of hours and had to travel, stay in Oslo, the capital of Norway, and apply for the visa because I could not apply normally, you know, through the internet and all these things, you know. But that's okay. So I thought my case was over once I granted the visa. But then that was, you know, that the sad thing and the very dangerous things that you should be aware of was like, you know, your fate in the hand of an officer. In my case was like 2 officers, civilian, probably they were FBI or whatever. I was so important guy, you know. And sitting there trying to explain how I, you know, I didn't understand what the purpose of this, why they distrust me, what they wanted trying to find out. Already everything is there. So the feeling was like they were just after you, just to slip or glip or say something, then they take you. Because they could not use me as a banned country, and because, like, luckily there were countries defending me, Norway. And I had to swallow all this unpleasant situation just because I wanted to present something to you. And I was thinking, what about a person, poor guy or lady or family coming here to have a humanitarian purpose? A person want to see the country. And how they will deal with that. If I am so weak, it's, you know, if I was saying something, hey, I'm tired, you know, 14-hour flight and then right away like 3 hours from three different interrogation, you know, from this room to another, and then in the end sitting with people asking me about detail about my film, and they were about to check all my stuff. And that was my red line, you know. I could have, and then I would never allow them to go through my computer, my phone, because they are not entitled to. What's the law for? You cannot create a no man's land on the border. This is it's, and I apologize. I promise you to talk about that, but I apologize to say that if this country, one thing made this country great, it's just because they try to be great in a sense of keeping, you know, these values that out there, still the repetition of it going on, you know. Human rights, expression of speech, and you should not be scared of people that does not look like you. We are all working together. All these values, it's in danger out there. And then one day your country will become Republic of Banana. Exactly. What's the embassy for? If I get a visa, what's the job? What's their job then? Why I have to go through that again and again and again? Who's respecting the law here? Who's disrespecting the integration of integrity of the country? I needed to say that to you. I may not come back here, and they may not allow me here, like a guy from New Zealand, made a film about propaganda, but because they don't like that film, they banned him to come in the country. This is not the way country works. This is not America. That's great America we are talking about. That's very weak, scare, building walls, and then, you die in it in the end. So, well, I appreciate that. But when the Iraq War, I apologize to go out.
No, that's okay. And it's worth noting that there were a number of filmmakers who were invited to be here for the festival this year who could not come.
Yeah.
For that reason.
Yeah, I'm lucky one, and I'm lucky one because I somehow have a nationality granted later on. But in London during the Gulf War, in 2003, there were over 1 million protesters in London. Some says like 1.5, 2 million. Huh?
Here too. Yeah. 1 million people in the streets of New York.
But what happened? Nothing. But that's the thing. I mean, it's not enough. Also, we need to try harder, because it will come to you. It will come to you. Yeah.
Well, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's like many.
Why don't we save this for we'll get a chance to get the audience into the discussion in a couple of minutes.
Just to round up that thing,
yeah.
Because I feel like I said that, and
yeah.
I'm feeling good. I hope you also feel good. This is not to make you feel bad about your country, because we also, America is a concept. It's not just a country. It's a concept. We keep that concept. And my protagonist was the only one. It's my passport. That's why I'm here. I'm talking on behalf of him, because he's not here. So my whole film, it's depend on one guy. And this guy, he's the one, if you like him, you like the whole, you trust him. And you believe in the case. And you believe, you associate yourself with him. You put yourself in his shoe. That was all my intention to work with this film, and to bring his story and give face to those hundreds of thousands like him, and just build empathy. That's my impact. So in this case, in this particular film, I am totally giving all the tools that I have to this guy in order to him express and bring it out for him. I was very afraid of bringing it out. How am I going to do this? How am I going to be able to? Because it's money involved, it's all these other things involved, that it's not only intention, You have a good intention. So you have to have all the other things in order to manage to make the film and bring it out and make people see in it. And we did that, luckily, and I'm here, by the way. And
yeah.
So.
And I'm assuming, and we'll get to Pau in a minute to tell his strategy in terms of how he's getting the word out about his film, but you've traveled to how many film festivals at this point with the film?
Well, I think in Norway, like, just to give you an example, when you have a film, the Film Institute, it's making like one copy of the film. They say DCP, the digital package, cinema package. And they send this, and then one festival finished, they send it to the next one, they cooperate. This is like a language, festival language. In our case, 2 was not enough, and then they made 3, and then they made 4, and then they made now 6 of these boxes are traveling, and they need more. Because luckily, people want to see that. Want to. Again, it's not about me and me as a filmmaker, about the great film. It's about this story that is being brought out. So I've been traveling with the film to do this job since we won the ITFA, which is very big major prize, like it's like in Sundance in Europe, and then that allowed the film travel more. I've been ever since, from the 2017 up to now, maybe over 40 festivals, 40 countries and towns.
Yeah, that's one of the points that I wanted the audience to hear about, is that when you're dealing with a social issue doc, that there's an enormous amount of work above and beyond having made the movie to, in terms of the travel and, getting the word out about it, et cetera. So, Pao, why don't you fill us in on your outreach?
We're talking about.
How have you been able to use the film and get it out there to get the message across?
Yeah, I think in a way it's of course the scale is different, but we share the same situation. I mean, we try to explain stories, at least in my case, and I think it's common here, that it's a local situation, but it can be understood from other people that don't know that local situation, and it can be a paradigmatic story that people can connect to their own reality. And in this, in my case, it was a little bit as he was saying, like the more you move the film around, the more you learn how the film is understood, and you even learn things about your film that you didn't know, or point of view that you didn't know, and this transforms into connections that you did not expect. So what I have seen is that the festival circuit, it's great to get to know and to enter several countries, but it's also very narrow, because I have seen a very different kind of audience when the festival is a human rights festival, for example, or it's just a documentary film festival, And I have seen people that really knew about the story when they ask you, and some of it they just found out in the cinema. So what I have realized moving around this film is that the main connection, the one that I was not expecting that much, is with social movements and I would not say political parties, but political movements that want to start, and they really want to show the film, because it's a film that communicates it's an optimistic film, it shows you that it is possible if you work on it. And I think it will become a tool that after this classical 1 year, the festival classical, I think it will have like a second moment when it will move in a more like, political parties, political institutions, social movements, universities in the United States already. It's been shown in several universities. So I think it's going to have like a second phase, and it will move on its own. You become like, you just look at the kit that you built just moving around. So I think it's a little bit like this.
What about in the United States? How will we get to see the film if we can't catch it at the festival?
Well, right now the film is already online. I mean, you pay for it. It's in a video.
What platform?
It's on Vimeo on demand.
On Vimeo? Okay, great.
But the link
Vimeo
is
on demand.
the link. So if you go adaformayor.com, you already go there. Okay. So you can watch, you can rent it, and you can download it. So this is already one possibility. Of course, the film will be open source at some moment. I mean, we had this deal with the producer. Probably in 1 or 2 years, it will be just online for whoever wants to watch it, no problem. And in the United States, where I found more complicity, was with there is a net of Spanish teachers in United States universities, and they moved it around several universities. So the first time I showed the film here was in a little tour in Minnesota, New York, and Washington universities. And it might happen again. So that's where I found more complicity,
Yeah, we haven't talked much about the online space, but 500 Years is going to be on Amazon Prime, for example, which is And we always wonder, so how can we connect that to outreach? Because it's Amazon, it's this giant, it's out there. So it's great that millions can see it, but also it'd be cool to find a way to, build an online, build out our online space to connect people who've seen the film, want to actually do something.
Yeah, and also a free pay model. So you give the film away for free, where you're not going to make money anyway. Like in Guatemala, we give our master to the largest bootlegger there. His name is El Buki. Because we want him to have a great copy of the film, and he distributes it throughout all the marketplaces in Guatemala in a way we never could. So sometimes, your outreach strategy has to think way outside the box.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, and actually that brings me to what is really my last question before turning things over to the audience, which is that one criticism you could level at using the documentary form to send these messages out to the world is that when you're dealing with festivals and the kinds of theaters that would show these kinds of movies, that in essence you're preaching to the converted. You're already talking to people who already, for the most part, are gonna be generally on your side. How do you get these movies out to people to really change hearts and minds about some of these issues? Any ideas, any thoughts?
I don't know how much you change hearts and minds. I think in many cases you awaken hearts and minds. People who maybe hadn't really thought about themselves as having an active role in society. And when they see examples of people who are doing that, we've had many university screenings where students said, I was studying this, but I decided to go into law and be a human rights lawyer, things like that. So that one person.
Now that's a great example.
That they'll actually take a turn in their life, and so it changed her mind about that. And obviously her politics, though, also must have been in line already, because otherwise she wouldn't have been inspired.
Right.
I think it's harder to reach people who are your natural allies. I think that's more of a challenge, actually. Like, how are we going to take 500 years, which is a story of Mayan resistance, to all the indigenous communities in the United States that would be the natural allies with the Mayans? So I think the thing is you have to work it, and you also don't be afraid to go to places where people might not agree with you, and to consciously go there and consciously enter into a debate, like our film about the International Criminal Court at the Naval Academy, for example. The United States was not only not a part of the International Criminal Court, but actively worked against it during the Bush years. So go to those places, throw yourself into it, go into public spaces, and make sure that your film is available as widely as possible.
Yeah, but for example, in my case, for me it was, I come from the activist movement. There's many people doing videos, to document activist situations, and I think the main problem is many times that we are too endogamic. We show, just what I was saying about the pictures of the holidays, we show, a very boring assembly that nobody would even watch for 5 minutes. Some people that was in that assembly will really enjoy it, So this kind of endogamic codes and ways of talking about things. And in our case, it was like, no, we want to make a film that can reach a wider audience. And for us, the risk was to be a little bit naive in the way we would talk about topics that political activists would say, okay, you should, get deeper into this. So I think it depends also on who do you want your audience to be when you are, at least in my case, when I was editing the film. And I was very clear that I wanted this film to reach a wide amount of people. And that just affects the way you edit, the way you use even the music, so many things. So I'm not that convinced that we are always showing the film to convince people. I think we make a first decision, or at least I did, that do we want to show the film to convince people, or do we want to reach wider audiences? And this is something that both options are good. I mean, I'm not saying that you always have to reach wider audiences, but it's something that it's there because you want to tell a story to other people, and you know that a way of talking will reach some people, another way of talking will reach another people, and of course you have your own way of talking, which you of course have to put there. So, I think there are many different things at the same time.
All right, so let's throw things open to the audience. There is a microphone traveling around, so don't shout out your questions. Wait for the microphone to reach you. Just raise your hand if you want to ask something, and they'll find you. Got one right here. Okay.
Very, very touching stories, all of you. My question is, what have the authorities, or what kind of response did you get out of authorities, or any tales that you have about how they reacted to all of this in your different countries?
Well, when I was covering the Rios Montt genocide trial, which is the first part of 500 years, I was in court every day. And part of the key forensic evidence against him was an interview that I had done with him in 1982 where he claimed command responsibility. Now he says he didn't order the troops to do this, but back then he said he did. So we were in court, and the judge ordered the videotape to be shown in its entirety. And he was looking at himself 25 years younger. Now he's almost 90, and everybody's like, ay, pobrecito, he can't go to prison. But then you see him at the height of his power and arrogance. And reporters went up to him afterwards and said, did you remember doing this interview with Pamela Yates? And he said, no, I don't remember her, but now I'll never forget her. And 2 weeks later, an insert in the major daily in Guatemala City came out with our pictures. And it said, here are the faces of infamy. Here are the enemies of the state. Look at them. Remember who they are. They'll get their just desserts. But that being said, the people in Guatemala who are actually in the film, the protagonists, they're much more at risk than we are. That just is like kind of a fingernail glimpse of what are the forces that we're up against.
Zaradash? Yep.
Well, I think I mentioned that in the beginning.
But what about in Iraq? I mean,
in Iraq, if you think about, because authority there, it's against everything. It's like to have a camera. It's like having a big gun machine going around. Maybe it's okay here in America. Guns are elsewhere. It's not. Sorry again. But carrying a deadly thing, it's much easier. It's much tolerated than having a camera. A camera, it's connected to espionage, spying, and all kinds of distrust. It's coming. You always have a bad agenda to carry a camera. And working in that environment is very difficult. And getting permission, it's almost very difficult. So, and in order to not be embedded, I just literally I ignored all these things. I just trusted my network, working, ensuring network in the Kurdish area. Kurdish area is relatively safe. But also, it's everywhere's eyes, like it's whatever you do, they know about you. But it's my hometown, it's my area. I knew where to go, how to work, and luckily nothing happened. My protagonist been in the town many times. We had the hub there. We digitalize everything, go through it, discuss it without any intelligence, know about it. And in the other area, these dangerous area, authorities like ISIS has authority, Qaeda has authority, the tribe has authority, a police guy has authority, can beat you up, take your camera, whatever. So you have to adapt to this kind of situation, how to deal with it, technically and also mentally. So technically it was okay, like we could hide everything. Mentally, you cannot help it to deal if you could get into, in a checkpoint or whatever, they find out about you. But generally, when I had to, because if you see the film, you will understand how what I'm talking about, about the getting permission. I needed a permission to make him safe. We go back to his town when his town fall. He had to flee, and then I wanted to just go back to this hospital he's working in. And that was a military zone. And I had to get permission from the highest commander of that region, regional commander. They're big, you know, these, and they're warlords. But you know, because he's Kurdish, and we are trusted in his mind. I got the permission. I got Nuri there, without putting him in danger, because they were they were enemy. They were looked at them as an ISIS people, which of course not. But generally, I don't have any authorization for the film, and I didn't want that. I am a little bit low profile when it's come to the screening in Iraq. They know about it. The media has been everywhere. Like it's been hundreds of interviews, articles about Nouri, and I set them up with BBC, set them up with some other sources to express from where he is in the camp now, in this IDP camp. So they know about it, and I'm building a little bit. And we got this the prize, this Nostra Ramandos from the Human Rights, which is good. I'm working on to make a paper for him that they don't bother him about what he's been doing. But we still little bit unsure about to go open now in Iraq, go in screenings, things like that, because the situation is not encouraging because of the tensions. But I think we will survive it in the end, because it's non-political film. What I tried to do, the biggest challenge in the film was trying to make the film not too dangerous for him, because I had as a moral obligation to protect him. And protecting him, it's just to not make enemy for him. And that's required to not allow him express politically. It's just pure humanistic, pure human being, which came very good, actually, in the end. This is the easiest language to communicate. You know, that's the basic language that connect all of us, that you sit in here and listening to a story somewhere that you don't have relation to it. It's your humanism. And that language was good in the end, and I am trusting on that one. The film is, maybe one day we can go out, but luckily nothing happened to Nouri throughout the film and after the film as well. So, but we don't have any, you know, I've tried to keep a little bit low when it comes to the local media and things like that.
So, Pau, did anybody try to shut you down, or?
No, of course it's a different context. But what is true is that, for example, she is a political figure, and films about a political figure are very easily called propaganda films, no? Because mainly by the other parties who don't share her points of view. And the interesting part is that at the beginning of the film and at the beginning of her decision, she was a little bit, I don't know, like maybe Bernie Sanders. Everybody thought she was very nice, but when the thing was becoming serious, you know, not everybody thought she was that nice. And you can see that in the film. And when the film was released, many people judged the film without watching it, like, oh, how can you make a film about her? You know, this is propaganda. And it was very good for the film, and this is something also good about the festivals. We premiered in a very famous Spanish festival, and the film won an award there. And then it went commercially on cinemas, and it stayed in cinemas for 1.5 months, which is quite a lot for a documentary film. And this gave the notion that this is a film. You know, you might not like her, but this is a film, and it has been it has good critics. You know, so this changed a little bit the perception. You know, sometimes people just talks about something without not even seeing it. And I think it's very good if a film like this one, that it's already been judged before you have watched it. The fact that it started with good critics and with a award, it's changed this perception. So this was something that went very good for the film. But of course, if you ask people in Spain or in Barcelona about the film, if they don't like her because they didn't vote her, they will say they don't like the film. Probably they haven't seen it. And then if they like her, maybe they will say it's a fantastic film, and maybe they have not seen it either. And for me, the most interesting was the ones who said, I don't like her, I didn't vote her, I watched the film, and it's a very good film. And that's the kind of feedback that you like, you know?
All right, do we have another? You want to?
No, I was just going to add, I once saw Michael Moore, who's the founder of this festival, talking to somebody on the right wing, you know, about one of his films, and it turned
Fahrenheit 9/11.
Fahrenheit 9/11. You know, the guy admitted that he hadn't watched the film, even though he was saying it was a horrible film. You know, everything Michael said was bad, and right. And then but he never watched the film.
Sometimes they talk about things in the film that are not in the film. You know, like okay.
Well, Michael often had a trick question. You know, what about that scene where and then the guy, of course. Actually, that scene didn't exist.
All right, another question. We have a hand over here.
First, I wanted to applaud each of you for taking risks to bring information to the world. Thank you for doing that for all of us. Secondly, my question is for our moderator as a producer and a distributor of films. I'm a movie lover. How do you decide what is a documentary versus what is a fiction film? Especially as our panelists have talked about in their experiences, everything from directing a protagonist to detached observation. Where is the line of a documentary?
Wow. It's funny, we were talking about this a little bit before the panel, only from the perspective that I actually had a professor in college who insisted that documentaries were just a genre and it was about a style of filmmaking and had nothing to do with truth or fiction or anything else. That's a very extreme perspective that I don't particularly agree with. But the answer is that line is getting fuzzier. That, you know, over the course of the many different types of documentaries that there are at this point, you know, I've worked on documentaries that were structured purposely like fiction in the sense that they were trying to tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. They built the drama. You really have no idea because of what was cut out of the movie, what is real or what isn't real. And they're just trying to tell the most compelling story possible. I think that there's a little bit of that involved in just about every documentary that comes out, because just by sheer omission, there are decisions being made that, you know, that depending on your perspective could mean that it's more real or not real or whatever. So it is very, very hard to actually define a documentary in a very, very specific way. You know, we were joking about how every film is a documentary because it's a documentary about whether the actors can read their lines or not. So yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have a definitive answer to that question, but I think that there's a general consensus that, generally speaking, documentaries are dealing with real people in real situations, in a way that's a little different than dealing with actors and, you know, et cetera. But above and beyond that, I think it's very hard. There have been films in this festival where I've participated where part of the debate was whether or not the film was a documentary.
Okay, and can I also say that Roger and me, when it came before the Academy Committee to decide whether it would be nominated, there were people that said, it's not a documentary, it's humor. It's not a documentary. Luckily, our horizons have grown, and we're so much more embracing and more tolerant of different kinds of documentaries. And I also have to say that we're seeing the world through many more perspectives now, because 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it was white men making documentaries. Now there are like women flooding the field, people of color flooding the field. So let's not confuse this multiplicity of perspectives with something that's not a documentary. They're all valid.
That actually deserved applause. Not that we
Great
have to ask for it or anything.
Great moderator.
And I'd say there's interesting examples. There's interesting examples. There's a film called Public Hearing, which is based on, the filmmaker found a transcript online of a public hearing in a town in upstate New York where they was trying to decide whether to let Walmart in or let Walmart expand. But anyway, it was a hearing with all the people from the town. And so he just had this transcript, and he made a film using actors and shot it in black and white, and an actual film, not video, and made this beautiful film. And the lines are exactly the transcript, and there's even a 5-minute coffee break, and in the film there's a 5-minute black break. So in that sense, it's documentary because it sticks to the transcript absolutely 100%, but using actors.
And so many documentaries have recreations now,
Yeah.
you know, where they're actually, creating scenes that they can't capture on camera. I mean, that doesn't have anything to do with the kind of documentary work that the people on the panel have done, but there are many films like that which, which have recreations that are built the same way that you would build a fiction film.
Actually, I did a film, When the Mountains Tremble in 1982. I have 2 scenes that were reenactments from recently declassified CIA documents. And oh my God, did I catch hell for that. It's like, why didn't you use newsreel footage? Why didn't you use a narrator? No, because it was more interesting to see actors actually reenacting these declassified documents.
Or what about animation? There's a lot of animation in documentaries now.
So cool.
Yeah, Waltz with Bashir.
I just changed my question. Are there any right-wing documentaries out there? I mean, I don't think I've seen any here, but
Steve Bannon was a huge creator of documentary films before he was in charge of Breitbart. Just FYI.
And also this guy, his last name is De Souza. He made a film, a right-wing documentary that's been a huge hit. He's made a lot of money with it.
I think the reason there aren't that many that we know of is because it's really hard to make money on documentary films. And so, we're doing it we're doing it as a labor of love. We're doing it because we believe in it. We're not rich, but we have a rich life. And that may not be the motivation behind people making right-wing documentaries.
My original question was on distribution. Have you approached different churches, Christian, Muslim, you use, for your film? Because there are a lot of churches out there that are very, involved in human rights and social justice. And we have film festivals. I mean, we have films shown at the church.
I can add a little bit of that. Thank you for asking this. In my town, Stavanger, in Norway, we also, they wanted to have the premiere. And usually premieres in the cinema, and one of the best, and that was the plan, with the red carpet and all these things, and I really don't like that. But we have an old cathedral. It's like 900 years old, which is beautiful. It's a domkirke, called in Norwegian. And then somehow they contacted me via messenger, just are you interested in having a dialogue of screening the film in, because church in Norway is like now they are having another trend of involving cultural things also, like not only choir but also pop music. I like the idea, it's very nice, and including other things, other activities, show, fashion, and things like that. And that was the first time they were thinking to have a film. I like it, the idea, so we started to work for having the premiere in the cathedral. So we had our Norwegian Stavanger, in the hometown premiere at the 900 years old cathedral, which was a really good success because they had space for 150 people, and there were 250 came. The purpose was to collect the money and send it to the IDP camp and for the protagonists, and the money is there. So that was the church. It was very, very interesting way of also involving those in church or mosque. I was in dialogue with them, but it's not as the same concept as in that church. So, but I'm thinking of involving these.
That's a good example of outreach right there.
Yeah.
Very good.
We would like to know more. Can we exchange cards afterwards? Like how we would engage with that network, how we would reach out to them?
It's an important point that should be made about how, what you're referring to are what we normally call non-theatrical screenings, which is, it could be anything from religious groups to school groups to, et cetera, et cetera. But there's an enormous amount of work that would have to be done to reach out one by one to various institutions around the country or around the world in order to get an audience. And as a result, the more efficient way of trying to handle it is to try to find umbrella organizations that would sponsor the screenings and then reach out to their own member affiliated groups and then create the screenings that way. So that way the filmmakers don't literally have to spend the rest of their lives calling up every church in the country, which they want to make another movie. So there are companies, non-theatrical distributors that specialize in these sorts of things, but usually they are very specific in terms of the themes that they work with because they know who the groups are that they do business with on an ongoing basis. So if they can tap into something like that, that would be really useful. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is that there is this mechanism, and I hope it still exists. It's now got to be about 8 or 9 or 10 years old, something called Brave New Theaters, which was an online marketplace in which filmmakers could post information about their movies and then groups can browse and find screenings that might be available on specific themes. It's bravenewtheaters.com, and I hope it still exists. But it was a really interesting idea to try to get audiences to be focused on things that might interest them because of the nature of their particular group. Is it called Brave New Films now? Okay, Brave New Films.
Hello?
Yep. Go ahead.
Paolo, is it? The Spanish guy? Is it Paolo?
Paolo.
Paolo? You said stuff about going from protests and then into politics. And of course, it takes a while before you get around to having a film and getting to this stage. But I was wondering, there was a movement, you talked about Let's Win as a movement name. And then there's one called Podemos in Spain. I just wonder how that's all going today. Is it you think there's progress, or do you think it's that's the question actually?
Podemos has become the most known name. It's a political party, but this citizen platform, that's how it was called, that was made in Barcelona, was made. The beginning of the whole thing was made from an idea that I think it was very interesting and very strong, and it was a group of 100 citizens wrote a manifesto. We have to win the institutions, we are together in the demonstrations, we are together stopping the evictions, we are together in many places, we have to be able to be together now. It's always difficult to get the left together. Here you have usually 2 parties, in Spain you may have 8. So it was like it's a moment, to go together. And the beginning was this group of 100 citizens, like activists, university teachers, people from culture, And this group invited political parties to join them. If you want, you can join us, but we are the ones who start, And one of the many political parties that came was Podemos, but it's not the only one. It's about 5 or 6. But in the list of the candidates, I would say in the first 20, maybe 15 had never been in an institution. So the idea was to invite political left parties, among them Podemos, to make this, they called it the confluence, like to build this confluence of citizenship and political parties. How is it going now? In several cities, these coalitions won, because Barcelona was the first one to put out the idea, but then it was replied in different cities, like Madrid and many other cities in Spain. And in several cities, these coalitions or these confluence platforms won. And they are working quite well. Of course, they have to make equilibriums. You don't win with a huge majority, so you have to pact and many of these things. And on the other hand, the Podemos party that was trying to win the national election did not make it. And one of the things that I think it's important to understand also what happens in Spain, and it can be an example, is the idea of the municipality. The idea that you begin from the cities, that you begin from this very local. Yes, because when you talk about changing things, what's the first thing you have? Your street, your neighborhood, your city. So it's not a coincidence that these new movements are working a lot better in cities than in this abstract power that is, you know, to govern a whole country from one place. You know, the connection with the place is very different. So Podemos a little bit has become more attached to this idea of this abstract power, and these confluence groups are more linked to the idea that, you know, we don't do the same things in Barcelona as we will do them in Madrid, as we, you know, so it's something more flexible. And I think it's also an intelligent strategy. If you want to build something, you know, you have to start from the beginning, from step by step, you know, one by one, create something that it gets very strong, and then it can grow. Because when the problems come, if the whole thing is not really strong, it breaks in, you know, it's really fast. So that, for me, would be the difference.
I just wonder if you could tell us again what it is, resistance. How do you look up your film and get in touch?
Skylight, SKYLIGHT.is. And then there's an online forum for cities and organizations that want us to come there with the Resistance Saga. We're going to have to, you know, pick between 10 and 15 in 2018, but we really want to work with a spectrum of cities.
You can also just Google Skylight Resistance Saga.
Okay, and you said you grew up in dictatorships in Guatemala or one of the other Latin American countries?
Argentina and Brazil, sorry.
Okay. And Ahmed, how do we get your film? How is your film available?
It's we haven't put it online yet because we need to go with it more in festivals, and also we have the TV in Europe. It's going to be broadcast sometime in November, like that. But I think in the end, if Nuri, the protagonist, agree to put it online, I will put it online, or I will take that discussion with the producer, which is she. I don't think she will mind, but we don't have Amazon or Netflix.
Do you have American television?
Not yet.
Not yet.
No.
I think you will.
I'm not sure. It's our challenge with the film was a little bit. It's too emotional, and you know, they all love it. Like you know, HBO and Netflix, and especially HBO. But they were a little bit afraid. You know, like it's too touchy. It's too. Yeah, it's too strong and.
Well, I saw the film in New York, and I encourage you all to see it. It's really a powerful film.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But they think about it. The HBO reconsider. You know, I met them in Breakshare. I don't know, but I'm going with it. So now in the festival world, it's been very good received, and I hope we can put it online when you know all the other things is finished.
Yeah. Should we give them all Schill and Nevin's cell phone number and have them all call in? No, it's...
Well, you can go to... first, let me see the film. Then you go to Nowhere to Hide documentary. If you Google it, so it will pop up to you. So you can go there. You can also donate. The donation goes directly to the family and maybe some of the other characters, which is not in the film. I could not use them. Yeah, or campaign, talk about it. That's other part of. But first, see the film, make your decision, and then, yeah.
I think that they already want to help even without seeing the movie.
That's very nice.
Yeah. All right, who else? We have a hand way in the back there. Do we have a mic for her? Yeah.
Oh, hi. Hi. Thanks all of you. I just wanted to say thank you for putting your lives on the line and for speaking the truth to power. As an artist, I'm a political artist also, and I just get, a comment, a negative comment, some kind of, negative feedback, and it hurts. Sometimes it's scary, and I'm just a painter. And what you guys do and the courage that it takes to keep doing it and keep bringing this to us is really something and really, really important. So I wanted to say that, and also that bringing these kinds of films here, the United States essentially is an island, and we aren't a country that touches a lot of other countries. And so it is so easy to be in this bubble, and unless we see it, it's hard to believe. And the best way for us to see these things that are really happening is through film. I recently moved to New York, and it wasn't until, that and I'm originally from northern Michigan, which is way up here, and it's a beautiful place full of amazing people in the middle of the country but unless you're interacting with people all the time, every day, who are dealing with struggles, who have family, who have been going through this, family members or people trying to get to them, or they can't get to their other family, or they're directly being affected by the Muslim ban and all of this stuff, it's very difficult to relate. You can be empathetic, but to really be hands in it and build relationships, personal relationships with it, it's all a theory until you can see it in front of you. So I just wanted to say thank you for the courage to do that. It's really, really important. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can comment on that one, this is likewise. You said it's an island, and I think if you not demand that, and that's my thanks now go to this festival, because this is the reason why we got the chance, and that's it's very important that you back up that. That you demand, you wanna find out more, you want to understand more what's going on. That's, in a way, we have to change this thinking. There are nothing taken for granted, especially when it's come to information. Information, if there is not two sides, there are plenty of sides. There are no one side. There are not one color thing. And that's just the way of thinking we need to change. I mentioned that 2 million demonstration here and there in the world. But what's happened, because the strategy is the same, we just do it for ourselves. Just buying our consciousness, going out, shouting. But that's not true. You do it just for yourself. It's not your humanity talking. It's your weak part, you buy your consciousness by going there or donate $100 or whatever, We need to change our thinking. We need to, next time, not allow people manipulate us. And that's the start. That's the start of starting, seeking for other information, even though it's convincing for you. Even though you are backing up whatever ideologies, but don't take it for granted, because we are living in an information time. There are plenty of other things, enough reason to manipulate you. And that's more, it's up to you, not up to us, So that's my I hope we start to think differently. That's my purpose. I'm not trying to change the world. I'm trying to change the way I think.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. So where do we have something in the room? Wow. I guess we covered it. Well, so thank you, panelists, for coming all the way to Traverse City from various parts of the world.
Thank you, Ira.
And thank you all for showing up this morning, and please go see their movies.
Thank you.